Good evening. My name is Sally Allen, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I welcome you to tonight's forum featuring candidates for State Senator District 18. The candidates will be on the ballot in the general election on Tuesday, November 6th. We are broadcasting from the studios of CTN in Ann Arbor. The League of Women Voters is pleased to sponsor these forums. The League is a nonpartisan civic organization that encourages informed and active participation of all citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and seeks to strengthen and broaden knowledge about our form of government and democracy. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take stands on issues we have studied. One of the League's most important goals is to assist voters in making informed choices at the polls, and thus we bring you tonight's program. Our moderator this evening is Peter Allen, who will explain the format and get us started. Peter?
Thank you, Sal. Now it's my honor to introduce the three candidates, Jeff Irwin, Thomas Repasky, and Martin Church. Thank you for showing up. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. The forum today will have this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement of up to 1 minute. Each candidate will have a closing statement of up to 90 seconds. In between, I will ask questions which came from the Ann Arbor community. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to the question. At appropriate times, the timers will hold up their paddles with the amount of time remaining and then finally a stop sign. Candidates, please stop when indicated so that we all have an equal opportunity to participate. Our timers are League members, Paige Silence and Randy Friedman. Now we're ready for the opening statement from Jeff Irwin. Jeff?
Thank you, Peter, and I'll start by thanking the League of Women Voters again. These forums are always great, and I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Jeff Irwin. I'm running for State Senate here in the 18th District in Washtenaw County, and I'm running because I believe public service is the best way for me to contribute to making our community and our state the best place it can be. And when I think hard about what are the things that make our community great and better, and what are the things that make Michigan a special place, I think about having great schools in every community. I think about having clean air and clean water, not just protecting the Great Lakes, but also clean drinking water in places like Ann Arbor and places like Flint. I think about standing up for people's equal rights, particularly on a day like this with the Kavanaugh hearings going on. I think about standing up for equality for women. I think about protecting our civil rights. I think about a criminal justice system that is truly just. And I think about finally fixing our roads. Those are the kinds of things that I want to work on. Those are the kinds of issues that I think provide the basic infrastructure for a successful state and a successful community with great jobs and a prosperous future for my children and others.
Thank you. Mr. Repasky, please.
Hello, my name is Thomas Repasky. I'm running for State Senate here in the 18th District, Ann Arbor, Ypsi area with the Working Class Party because I believe that working class people need to be able to represent themselves, to have their own party. So I think working class people need to be able to influence what happens in their communities across the country, but here as well, to fight for better schools, public services, healthcare, and wages.
Thank you. And Mr. Church.
My name's Martin Church, and like Jeff, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to present my case. Also, I'd like to thank the viewers who are watching and learning about us. I come from Ypsilanti, been there for 30 years, grew up in the city of Taylor. Spent a lot of time doing different things, learning about the state of Michigan and our community. A lot of the problems we have are because the state has decided that they need to take over what we as a local community can do. As Tip O'Neill used to say, all politics is local, and we need to bring it back to local. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's start with the questions. We'll start with Mr. Irwin. Here's the question. The public infrastructure in Michigan has been underfunded for decades. The state needs to come up with at least $4 billion more each year for decades for upkeep of roads, bridges, water systems, and communications infrastructure, according to the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission. How do you plan to address this issue?
Yeah, this is a huge issue, and the longer we neglect this issue, the more it's going to cost our residents. So even though the price tag now for fixing our sewer infrastructure, our drinking water infrastructure, and our roads and bridges is a large price tag. It's daunting. That number is only growing. And it actually costs our citizens as well when we neglect these responsibilities. Right now, MDOT estimates that the average citizen spends about $500 a year on car repairs. And we could actually fix our roads and get them to a position where 80% of our roads were in good condition or better within 5 years if we had each of those citizens pay an additional $50 a year in gas tax. So that's the kind of value I think it would bring to our citizens in an economic way if we were to fix our roads, and I think we ought to do it with user fees. I think that when it comes to trying to capitalize investments in our drinking water and sewer infrastructure, the state needs to be in a position to make financing available to local communities so that those things can be, those things being sewer systems and drinking water systems, can be funded with fees from the users from those systems. But the state can be very instrumental in bringing down the borrowing costs, making those funds available, and getting those projects going. These are projects that are going to put people to work in good paying jobs, making a lasting, tangible improvement to the infrastructure in our state. And I think that we need to get on it and do it.
Mr. Repasky.
I'll probably say something similar to this a couple times tonight, but I think the money is out here in the U.S. You know, one of the richest countries in the world. You know, the money exists to fund things like schools, things like infrastructure, but it's not going where it needs to go. I think that, you know, working class people pay a lot in taxes. Lots of people pay a lot of tax money, and yet there are still problems with basic public services like this. So I think that corporations need to have some of their profit taken away to fund things like this for working class people.
Thank you. Mr. Church.
The big issue that we've been looking at is taxes. So every dollar you take out of the hands of the working people, of the corporations that support and pay for those jobs, is money that's not put back into the economy. The city of Ypsilanti and Ypsi Township showed that the local community can support it if they put together a plan. We funded a replacement road program, which cost far less than if the state stepped into it. We fixed our waters. We're still working on it. You're being done. We did it within our budget, and it's time for the other communities to start living in their budget and start planning on these maintenance. Our cause has been lack of plans. Everybody said, let's kick it down the road, let's not deal with it. Well, it's come back to haunt us now. It's time for the local community to step up and say, this is what we need. What they have up in Calcutta is not the same as Ann Arbor, it's not the same as Monroe. It's time for the local community to put together their plan and return it to the local community.
Next question, starting with Mr. Repasky. Environmental issues, especially the 1.4 dioxane plume in the local aquifer and the high levels of BFAs in the Huron River and throughout the state, are important to many Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti residents. Do you plan to introduce or support legislation that would strengthen environmental protections? What is the best role for the MDEQ to play in our environmental concerns?
I think that the environment is very important for working class people. You know, drinking water is an important thing. I think that the money needs to go to cleaning up things that people use. You know, public services like this need to be funded. So, you know, dirty water is a huge problem. People can't take on healthcare costs, and they can't afford to buy water themselves or deal with the consequences of environmental problems caused by either lax regulations or corporate mistakes or corporate negligence. So I think that needs to be dealt with by the state.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Church.
Environmental cleanup is a tough subject to deal with. every year we come up with a new item that we've contaminated our area with. A few years ago, you never even heard about PFAs. Today, it's all over the place. The bloom has been around for years. Most of this was people overlooked it. We need to figure out how to clean it up safely, but we also have to figure out where can we shift it, where we can build individuals that were responsible, we have to. Where we can't, we're going to have to figure out some way to clean it up. I don't have all the solutions, and I will have to consult with people who are known to work with this stuff. I'm not knowledgeable of everything. I wish I could be, but I have to look at what the Department of Quality, Environmental Quality has to say. But that's about it. There is no easy answer.
And Mr. Irwin.
So the protection of our water is incredibly important. And here in Michigan, we live in a state that is so awash in water. It's so abundant. I think sometimes we've lost track of just how important it is. And so, one, we need to strengthen protections for water in general and groundwater in particular. Michigan has very lax standards for the protection of groundwater. We need to get back to a regime like we had 20 or 30 years ago where polluters pay, polluters are held accountable, and they're required to clean up their mess. We got away from that in the 90s, and we need to get back to it. Specifically to some of the problems that are happening here locally, we absolutely need a statewide standard for PFAS and PFOA and that whole family of chemicals. Right now, the state is really caught in a lurch without a pollution cleanup standard, and that isn't giving the DEQ the legal tools they need to crack down on these polluters, make sure that they stop putting it in the water, and make sure they clean up the mess that they've created. But we also need more enforcement resources for the DEQ. The DEQ has been starved for resources for many, many years. And if we expect the DEQ to be out there protecting our rivers and making sure that parts plants and Wixom are not polluting our groundwater, we need to give them the resources to do that. Finally, on Gelman, this has been an issue I've been involved in for a long, long time. And there's more that we can do to make sure that that plume is dealt with more appropriately. My goals for the cleanup are to get the cleanup plan amended so that we have more pumping and treating happening at the core, so more of that water is cleaned up by the responsible party, and to change the goal of the cleanup to be that we arrest the development, arrest the spread of the plume so it doesn't continue to get larger. We need to change the goals of the whole cleanup plan.
Thank you. Next question starts with Mr. Church. Statutory state revenue sharing, a source of revenue for local communities, has declined significantly since 2002. Further, state law limits the kind of revenue generating tools the municipalities can use, such as local sales tax. What systemic changes would you support to ensure local communities are adequately funded?
You have to go back to like you do with a household budget. You got to figure out all your bills. That means that the revenue sharing has to be returned back to what we said it would be back when we started it, and that needs to be treated as a bill, not as a thing that you can manipulate. Too long it's been used as a bargaining chip to get other projects done. We need to get it back here, and it needs to be the first thing that gets paid and not the last thing.
Mr. Irwin.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to restore revenue sharing to the promised levels. And as was alluded to by Mr. Church, there was a deal that was cut between the state and local governments many, many years ago where the state government took away all of the revenue gathering options that local governments have except for property tax. And in exchange for taking away all those tools and making them statewide, the state agreed to share that revenue, and now that promise has been forgotten. And so the legislature simply needs to step up to the plate and make sure that local governments are made whole with respect to that promise. Unfortunately, I don't think that really answers your call for a systemic change. I think that would require putting it in the Constitution, but at the very minimum, we should have a state legislature that takes the promises of the state seriously and makes our local units whole. We also need to do the same with fire protection grants. Communities like Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti right now are covering the costs of some portion of the fire protection at the EMU and at the University of Michigan. The state needs to meet its commitments there as well. That's a big cost to our local governments, and they need to be made whole. That was something that I worked on a lot in the State House. We made some progress on, but we need to get those levels up to be full. Also, there's another problem that a lot of our communities are facing right around the corner, which is the replacement of the personal property tax. I don't know if folks remember, but we voted to repeal the personal property tax. The citizens voted for that, I believe, in August of 2015, if I remember correctly. And now the loss of that revenue is really starting to be felt by some of our local governments, particularly townships that might have industrial facilities, and those kinds of facilities are paying a lot less tax. And there's a question: is the state going to make those revenues up, or are we going to leave the locals in the lurch again? I think we need to do right by our local governments.
And Mr. Repasky.
Like I started with, I think that the money exists again to fund these kinds of things. I just the question is where it's coming from and who right now is controlling the money. So I believe that there needs to be funding for local governments, governments that don't have as much power, or funding for the people in these areas, places like Ypsi or smaller towns, Ann Arbor, Ypsi area, smaller towns around there. But I think that working class people need to make the fight in order to get that funding.
Okay. We're now ready for question number 4, starting with Mr. Irwin. In 1992, voters approved a constitutional amendment setting term limits. The goal was to provide a sensible check on career politicians wielding undue power and influence for decades. What is your view on the impact of term limits in the state legislature? And would you support a constitutional amendment to make term limits less strict?
Well, I'll start at the end of the question. Yes, I would support something to make term limits less strict, because I believe that the impact of term limits has been a lack of experience and institutional knowledge within the chamber at the legislature. And what that does is that really punctuates the power of the special interests and the lobbyists who are seeking to get a result for their clients, whoever that may be. So I believe that information is power, and we want our public officials, the ones who are pressing the yes or the no button on budgets and bills, to be the ones with that superior information. And unfortunately, when you get folks who are looking at a $56, $57 billion budget for the first time, that's a daunting task. State government's a big operation. We need people there who have knowledge of and respect for the institution, know the history of the issues so that they can be most effective for their constituents. And I remember a time when we had members on both sides of the aisle who were really well respected for their depth of knowledge in certain areas like mental health or health care. And these are complicated issues. So that's what I would do. I would certainly lengthen them or alter them in some way to put more power in the hands of the people. Frankly, I think that's one of the reasons why you saw the legislature do things like vote for an emergency manager law. I think if you'd have more of those legislators who had been seasoned in local government, they would have had greater respect for the importance of having democratically elected local officials that are responsive to their citizens in their city or town.
Mr. Repasky.
I think working class people, the vast majority of people, need to have more influence on what happens in their communities, in their areas. So I think that that there needs to be more voting. Voting is certainly important, but even on non-voting days, non-voting issues, there needs to be input from working class people and the community as a whole. I think that shorter term limits, shorter terms would have an effect only if people were actually able to vote for what they wanted to vote for, and if important issues were theirs to deal with.
Thank you. And Mr. Church.
Frankly, I'm in favor of term limits. I would love to see it at the congressional level. Sure, you may lose individuals with, quote, knowledge, but you also lock out individuals who have no knowledge who would like to see a change. If I had to run against some of the people that we've had, it would be extremely difficult because they would have a well-oiled machine that just keeps generating revenue. And not revenue for the communities, but revenue for themselves. We see that in Congress right now with an unlimited term. They just keep going and going until they either die or they do something so stupid that the voters finally raise up and kick them out. most voters just go and say, they go for the common name that they love. And so that's how we keep some of these dynasties in place. Term limits cuts out the dynasties, gets it back into the hands of the people. It forces people to come out and listen.
Thank you. Next question, we start with Mr. Repasky. Only 29% of our 4th and 8th grade students are at or above reading math proficiency. What are the most significant changes in K through 12 education that you believe would help improve the rank of Michigan schools relative to other states?
I think better wages for teachers, more funding for schools in general. I think if teachers are not paid well, there are going to be fewer teachers, and if schools are not well funded, it's going to be a harder place to learn. I don't think these changes are going to happen without input from a lot of people, working class people.
Thank you. Mr. Church?
As a homeschooling parent, or at least as I used to be, my kids have now grown, graduated from college, and are on to successful careers, one of which is a computer engineer designing microchips, which is all math. Bringing education back into family is the solution. Too long we've used our schools as places of holding kids. It's time for it to be returned to the parents, for them to say, my child is going to learn, and if I have to stand over them, it'll happen. We have new technology, we have computers, we have the internet. We could bring it back into the home for a fraction of the cost and start putting education in the home. You teach the parents how to teach, the kids learn quickly. And that's the real solution. We got to stop looking at it as a farm that you're trying to grow a bunch of crops and nobody cares about the kids. The kids are looking for their parents to guide them, to lead them. We've broken up the families. We got to get it back. Bring the families back, we bring our education up.
And Mr. Irwin?
So I think that universal, free, public education is maybe the smartest, best, most successful thing that we've ever done as a nation. It's been an incredibly successful enterprise. It's been right at the heart of the prosperity and successes that we've had as a community and as a nation. So I'm a big supporter of it. I think it's the most important thing in state government, and I think it's time that we start funding it as if it were the most important thing. And I think back to when Michigan was one of the leading states in the nation in terms of public education, that was a time when we were a top 10 funder of public education. We're now in the bottom half of states. Some rankings put us in the bottom quartile of states in terms of funding into the classroom. And I think that's right at the heart of our problem. Mr. Repasky said it. We need to have better funding for our teachers. They need to be better paid. They need to be worried about what can they do tomorrow to inspire their kids, not how fast can I get to my second job tonight so that I can make my mortgage. We need to have smaller class sizes, particularly in the lower elementary schools. We need to make sure that our educators are respected. And finally, I would say that we also need to take a little step back from using these test scores as a means of ascertaining the quality of the schools. Test scores do a great job of measuring the income of the parents. They don't always do a very good job of measuring the quality of the instruction. So we need to get better qualitative measures, and we need to provide more resources so we can get the inspiration and the joy back into our public schools so that they can be places of real learning and assets to our community.
Next question starts with Mr. Church. The role of money in politics at all levels of government is a concern to voters. What are the challenges to a representative democracy where there are so few checks or balances regarding money in politics? And what specific changes in Michigan laws would you advocate for?
First of all, the accountability begins with the candidate. We publish all of our income and outgo for our campaigns. Take a chance, go up to the site for the Secretary of State, the Washtenaw County Treasurer's Office, pull up our records. It's public information. Look and see who's getting what from where. That tells you who they're going to back. If they're taking in a whole lot of money, they're going to have to pay it back to somebody. Look and see where. The control begins at the local level with the voter. They have the responsibility. I'll tell you right now, I have not spent much time raising funds because frankly, I can win as many votes with money as without. People who chase money are chasing something else. I'm relying on the Lord to provide.
Mr. Irwin.
Yeah, we desperately need campaign finance reform in our nation, and particularly here in Michigan. We've got some pretty weak campaign finance reform and ethics laws in Michigan. When I was a state rep, I introduced a number of pieces of legislation, sponsored or co-sponsored, to try to close some of these loopholes, and I'm eager to get back to the Senate so we can keep working on some of these ethics issues. Certainly trying to close the revolving door between the legislature and the lobby corps with some sort of cooling off period would be an idea that many states have employed that we haven't done here in Michigan. Financial disclosure for candidates. So not only do we know where they're getting their campaign funds, but what financial interest do they have personally. That's something that a lot of states do that we don't do here in Michigan and we should do. We should also have better disclosure of who's whining and dining our lawmakers. There's a lot of money spent up in Lansing, whining and dining legislators in the effort to lobby them on this issue or that. And all of that spending needs to be disclosed and out in the open so that the public knows who's trying to influence their lawmakers and how much. Finally, just straightforwardly on the campaign finance side, I think we need to lower the campaign giving limits. When I was in Lansing, we doubled the campaign giving limits. Almost nobody I know gives at the max. But there is a very small group of people, particularly some billionaires in the west side of the state, that write a lot of max-out checks. There's no reason why we need to have the limits be as high as they are. We also need to make sure that all the campaign finance money that's given to influence voters and candidates is disclosed. We've got big loopholes with super PACs and 527s and some of these 501c4 nonprofits that do not disclose their donors, but yet are doing clear political advocacy and electioneering work. That should all be disclosed.
And Mr. Repasky.
Yeah, the amount of money that's being spent on campaigns is really amazing. It's clear. You can tell by the money which candidates who is supporting which candidates. Corporations are really able to choose who they want to have the most advertising, have the most ability to get their name out there just by funding them. I wrote in one of my responses to online questions, I was really surprised when I started running. My email is online, and I started receiving emails trying to sell me voter information, like phone numbers, emails, this kind of thing, services to get my name out there, get my candidacy out there. So that was really surprising to me. I didn't imagine that would happen. So yeah, I think that the money being supplied to candidates is really not a good thing.
Thank you. Mr. Church?
I think I just answered that one.
We're going now.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Question 7. Well, we've got 2 questions to go, and then we've got your final comments. Sorry. And we're going to start with Mr. Irwin. Michigan is one of 5 states that automatically charges 17-year-olds as adults in the criminal justice system. In nearly every other aspect of the law, including voting, buying a lottery ticket, or signing a contract, 18 years of age is the legal requirement, yet 17-year-old youth must be prosecuted and sentenced as adults in criminal courts in Michigan. Research on personal development, shows that 17-year-olds are not adults and are better served in juvenile justice systems. Would you support raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction to age 18?
Yes, I would, and yes, I have. Back when I was a state representative and had the opportunity and honor to serve the 53rd District for 6 years, I authored a number of bills that would have raised the age and made it so that juveniles were kept in the juvenile system. And while I was there, we ended up passing some bills, not the bills I wrote, but we ended up passing some bills that were a little bit more of a compromise proposal and basically took most offenses and put them into a bucket where 17-year-olds would be charged as juveniles, but for a limited set of offenses, they would be charged as adults. And we passed that out of the House with actually an overwhelming bipartisan majority. So that gives me some hope that if I'm fortunate again and get an opportunity to serve in the state Senate, that a lot of my former House colleagues on both sides of the aisle will be in the Senate, and that'll be one of the things we can get done. Also, as a member of the Appropriations Committee over Corrections, we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that juveniles that were at one time being kept at the Thumb Correctional Facility were relocated and put into more appropriate facilities. There is a lot we need to do to reform our criminal justice system, and starting with juvenile justice is a great way to get that bipartisan ball rolling.
Thank you. Mr. Repasky.
A lot of money is spent enforcing laws and sending people to prison, running prisons, and I think that some of this spending could be avoided if in the past or starting soon, this money was spent instead on programs for young people, or even like jobs for people as they get older, instead of imprisoning people, poor people, working class people. There should be opportunities. People in bad situations end up in prison, and they should have public services and have jobs available to them instead of this.
Okay, Mr. Church.
In my younger days, I did a lot of ministry in the prison system with my church. Yes, there are some kids that probably could have been better off in a different facility. However, I've also been victimized by crime. We have to take into account the victim. What was the crime? I would rather leave it to the prosecutor and the defense team to figure out the best way for these people to be served. For politicians to decide what the criminal penalty should be is wrong. We got to bring it back to the judge and to the prosecutors to figure out, is this something that child should undergo? And I hate to call them a child. At 17, they would not see themselves as a child. We have people right now trying to get 16-year-olds eligible to vote. 16, 17-year-olds are almost as capable, even though they're not fully matured enough. I have seen some that are very matured, who know the difference of right and wrong. Let's get it to where it should be, into the hands of the judge and of the prosecutors to determine what is the best course of action for the crime and the person.
Thank you. Our last question before your final concluding comments, starting with Mr. Repasky. The 65-year-old Line 5 transports 22 million gallons of Canadian oil per day through the Straits of Mackinac and the state of Michigan to Sarnia, Canada. Many citizen groups have expressed concern about its age and its physical deterioration. Do you support decommissioning the pipeline? And if not, why not?
So currently the guiding force behind energy policy in Michigan, it's not, and even the whole United States, it's not the environment, it's not meeting energy needs even, it's the energy corporations, they're in control, and they want to make a profit for themselves. So instead of this, these profits could be used to create sustainable energy infrastructure, making lots of jobs, employing many people. However, corporations won't do this themselves, so it's up to working people to organize and push for these changes.
Okay, Mr. Church?
Line 5 has been a heartache for a lot of people. There's a couple of things we have to consider. One, the age. Should it be decommissioned because of the age? Probably, but it needs to be replaced. We recently had a ship run aground carrying a lot of the cargo that Line 5 carries. We nearly lost the load aboard that ship. Which would we rather have? A controlled environment that you can shut down in a relatively period of time, or a lot of ships carrying that load, or worse yet, putting them onto semis rolling across the Mac. That material has to get down here somehow, and the materials generated moved back over. That's what that pipeline does, move the energy source. Is there an easy fix? Short of rebuilding the whole thing? No, it's not going to be easy. Decommissioning it because of the age, once we get a replacement line that meets the qualifications, yeah, shut it down. But we got to have a way to move it safely and not just say we're going to shut it down and then move it across by semis. We don't have enough semis to move that stuff. Okay.
Thank you. And Mr. Irwin.
Yes, I would continue to call for decommissioning Line 5. When I was in the legislature in 2015, I believe it was February, I introduced a resolution calling upon the governor and the attorney general to do just that. And that was 3 years ago now. So I would continue the call to decommission Line 5. The line is really just a shortcut through Michigan for Canadian oil and gas to get down to Canadian refineries in Sarnia, almost all of which product ends up in Canada anyway. And there's no reason why they couldn't go around. They have probably enough capacity to send it around on current lines, but they could also build new lines that go around the Straits of Mackinac, because that is the worst place in the entire Great Lakes system to put a pipeline. The currents there are very complicated, change all the time, are often going in different directions at different heights in the water column. And the Coast Guard and every environmental expert that's looked at this, including the Graham Institute of Sustainability here at the University of Michigan, has said that if there were a leak in this pipeline at this particular location, it could not be dealt with. And so this is the worst place to have a pipeline. Probably should have never been put there. It's over 50, or it's 65 years old now, and it needs to be decommissioned. And I think that we can replace the value that these hydrocarbons are bringing, if they're bringing any at all, by just getting a lot more aggressive about promoting clean energy, promoting energy efficiency. Michigan should be a leader in clean energy and efficiency, not a pass-through for Canadian oil and gas in the worst, most dangerous place we could have it.
Thank you. And we're now ready for closing statements. We're going to start with Mr. Irwin.
Well, thank you again. Thank you for this forum and this opportunity to speak to the voters. I hope I get an opportunity to serve in Lansing again. And, you know, for many of the voters out there, I hope you're feeling the same way I am, which is that we've been watching our state go in the wrong direction for many, many years. We've been watching the state lower taxes on wealthy people and raise taxes on poor people, cut our education fundings, lessen our environmental protections, lessen our rights and civil liberties for our citizens. And now I feel, and I hope we all feel, that this is a moment where we can seize real change. And if things go well this fall and I have an opportunity to serve, I hope I can be a leader in making that change great for the state of Michigan. We need to take a new direction, a new approach to how we serve our citizens here in the state of Michigan. We need to get back to investing in our people. And I'm excited to do that. Washtenaw County has a real opportunity and I think a real obligation to be a leading voice in the state and a leading voice in progressive politics here in Michigan. And I want to be right at the point of the spear, working hopefully with a new Democratic governor and a new Democratic Attorney General and as many Democratic colleagues as possible to try to make that change that we need here in Michigan.
Thank you. Mr. Repasky.
So I'll say what I said at the beginning. I think that working class people need their own party. I think that even if elected, I could not make the kinds of changes that working class people need. You know, things like funding for schools, for public services, clean water, environmental protections, more job opportunities and better wages. These are not the kinds of things that a couple of elections here and there change. So I think that working class people still need to continue organizing, working together to make the changes they need. Now, the Working Class Party is on the ballot in Michigan. There are 11 candidates across the state, but I think that still working class people need to continue organizing and working together.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Church.
I'd like to thank the opportunity to present my case. I believe that it's time to stop sending power all over the place. It's time to bring it back to the local family. Every dollar sent to Lansing, every dollar sent to the feds is money that's not invested locally. We've got to stop wild spending. We've got to start balancing our budgets, holding our local governments accountable for their balanced budgets. We've looked too often for Lansing to bail out everybody else. That money is not being used locally where it should be. We need to have a government that stops trying to become our worship centers, trying to meet the needs of everybody. It is our worship centers that should be meeting the needs of the local community. We know who needs what. we need to step up and start doing it. People have said, no, we need to look to the government. No, they never solve anything. All they do is take and take. It's time for it to stop. Bring it back to local community. Have the funds from sharing come back to the local community. Let the local politicians handle it and not kick it down the road. It's time to stop what we've been doing and change direction. Hopefully with a Republican governor and a Republican Attorney General and a Republican Secretary of State, me in the Senate and my counterpart in the House, we can bring it back to the local community. Thank you.
Thank you.
The League thanks the candidates for participating in tonight's forum, to those who contributed questions, and to CTN for making this program possible. These forums will be rebroadcast on Channel 19 a number of times between now and the election. They are also available on demand for streaming on your computer or smartphone. Go to our website, lwvanarbor.org, and look for the link to the programs. Please urge your friends and fellow residents to watch these forums too. For additional nonpartisan information on candidates and ballot issues, go to vote411.org, the League's voter resource guide covering local, state, and federal candidates and current proposals that will appear on your ballot. And please, remember to vote on November 6th.